What's up, y'all? This is Alex from the Rim Review. The Rim Review is a page that provides in-depth basketball analysis, and today's episode is going to be our first video after the NBA draft. In the coming months, we're going to have more in-depth basketball analysis. However, in today's video, we're going to have a little bit of fun and rank each team's draft on a tier list. For those of you who don't know, a tier list is a very simple concept where basically S is the best, D is the worst, and teams are better within each tier from left to right. Now let's begin and talk about the Philadelphia 76ers. When looking at the Philadelphia 76ers draft class, I think they got two guys who it's really hard for me to believe won't have very solid careers in the NBA. Jared McCain is extremely talented and offers a variety of different skill sets, ranging from his shooting, ability to play off 2 feet, and pure effort. Adem Bona is a really sneaky and hidden gem that they were able to select in the second round, and there's a couple of things that I like about him. First off, I think he has the opportunity to be a great change of pace big to give Embiid some rest. Adem Bona is going to rim run, he's going to block shots, and he's going to try his best to set physical screens. The number one knock on Adem Bona and the reason why he fell to the second round was his height, but I do think having Adem Bona in this backup role is going to fit him really well. Overall, I think Philly had a very successful draft. They didn't go crazy, they didn't do too much, but I think they were able to make two really solid selections, and I would not be surprised if both of those guys are in their rotation at the end of the season next year. For that reason, I'm going to rank them in A tier. Now we're going to move on, and we're going to be discussing the Washington Wizards. And I feel like the Washington Wizards, honestly for me, had a couple of different things in their draft, some of which I liked and some of which I didn't. I love the Alex Sarr pick, and to be honest, I think they got lucky because in my eyes, Sarr is the best player in this draft, and I think he is extremely talented. Being able to get him at number 2 is honestly a gift, and it's going to help the Wizards a ton. They followed this up by selecting Bub Carrington with a pick that they were able to acquire from a trade, and I think that it is a fine pick. What I like about Bub Carrington's game is his playmaking. His 2.21 assist to turnover ratio clearly showcased his high basketball IQ, and he also was able to show flashes of creating for himself. However, I doubt that he's really going to be given the reins to run an offense in Washington. Maybe they make him a backup point guard. I think that this is an opportunity for them to really use this coming year to develop him because they are still in a rebuild, very much so. But I also don't think that he can really play off the ball that well. He's not a good catch and shoot guy, and I think there's a lot of flaws to his game, and I think he's a fine pick. And I think it's really tough when you go from Sarr, it's crazy to say somebody drafted number 2 was a steal, but I do truly believe it was a steal. And I think you go from that to getting Bub Carrington, who I think is okay. And then they have Kaishan George, who I'm really iffy about. I understand why scouts like Kaishan George, and the main reasons are he's got a very good shot and he's at a very good size with good wingspan. That typically yields a very solid NBA player. However, his athleticism, playmaking, and overall decision-making process needs some work. He was rarely used as a screen setter, which is concerning for someone who's as tall as he is. He got blown by a lot on defense, and I just don't trust his ability to put the ball on the floor. Because of that, I think they probably took Kaishan George a touch too high, although they probably couldn't have waited until later to get him. However, I still don't love that pick. So when I'm evaluating the Wizards draft and I look at the types of players that they got, I think that they got a really great pickup in Sarr, but I don't love the other two guys. I think I'm going to put them in the top of B tier for now, but I'm probably going to move them to the bottom of A tier, depending on how things go. Now let's move on to the Hawks, and the Hawks were able to select 2 players. Number 1 was Zachary Richardson, and I really don't like that pick. I understand that Alex Sarr very much so wanted to be the guy and was willing to go to Washington rather than be the number 1 pick because of that. However, I think that the Hawks had a really interesting opportunity, especially after the DeJounte Murray trade that they made earlier today, to use the draft as a stepping stone to rebuild their franchise. If they were to get a player like Alex Sarr that has unicorn potential, they could keep him, they could keep Jalen Johnson, and they could keep Onyeka Okongwu and make a variety of different moves, trading players such as DeJounte Murray, maybe even looking at a Trae Young package, although I don't know how much they would have gotten for that. But they would have that unicorn guy, And for me, Rishashare, I think, is a very solid player, and I think he's going to have a long career as a starter. And I think he's going to be a really good 3-and-D guy, and maybe if he hits his peak, he's Michael Porter Jr. with defense, which is an awesome player. But he could also just be a solid 3-and-D starter. And I think when you miss out on the unicorn potential to potentially save your franchise, that's a big miss. What I do love is their second round pick being able to snag Nikola Dursic in the mid to early 40s. I had Dursic as a top 25 pick in my draft big board, and I think he could be a great asset for Atlanta. Because of that, I give them a little bit of a break after picking Zachary Rishashare. However, I don't think that it's enough to move them into B tier, and because of that, I'm going to rank them in the C tier. Now, let's move on and look at the Cleveland Cavaliers, who only made one selection in this draft, and that was picking Jalen Tyson. I understand maybe looking at Jalen Tyson as a potential guard who's going to be gritty, play hard defense. However, I don't think that Jalen Tyson is necessarily ready to contribute day one. At Cal, he was given the ability and the freedom to play a style of basketball that simply will not be allowed in the NBA. He took a lot of high volume shots and not the best shots. I think the Cavs already have enough ball dominant guards to where it doesn't necessarily make that much sense for where they selected him. I think there are a variety of other wings that Cleveland could have potentially considered picking at that spot, and that was their only pick, and because of that, I'm going to put Cleveland's draft at the D tier. A lot of people are going to be surprised by my opinion on the Pistons draft, but I actually really liked it. Firstly, I think the Ron Holland pick is really a swing at the fence. If Ron Holland is able to hit, you're able to get a great defender that can be a good slasher, drive, penetrate, and score, and create his own offense. I don't believe that his shot will ever develop, and I think that he'll probably have issues playing alongside Asar Thompson. However, I really like Ron Holland, and I think if the Pistons believe in him, I like seeing them take a gamble and get him, rather than A, hoping that they could trade back in order to get him later and then having him picked in front of them, or B, taking what would be considered to be a safer or more conventional pick. So I love seeing that from Detroit. And what is a really nice cherry on top for that for Detroit is the fact that they were able to snag Bobby Klintman at 37. I had Bobby Klintman at 23 on my big board, and I think he offers extremely high upside. I think there's a world in which he becomes a Trevor Ariza style player, and that's a steal at 37. As far as where I would rank Detroit, I'm very tempted to put them in S tier. However, for now, I'm going to put them at the top of A tier. When looking at Indiana, there are a couple of things to consider. Firstly, they didn't have a pick in the first round, and instead their first selection was Johnny Furphy, who I think is a solid 3-and-D tall player who is okay. I actually like Johnny Furphy more than Kaishan George, but that Johnny Furphy suffers from the same issues, such as not being able to put the ball on the floor. I really did not like their next pick in the second round in Tristan Newton, because to me, Newton is much more a product of the UConn system rather than actually his talent alone. I think that there are a variety of other players that they could have selected at that slot that could have been more ready, and on my board, I had Newton going undrafted. Finally, I like their Enrique Freeman selection. First off, amazing story for Enrique Freeman, and he will be a player I drop a deep dive video on soon. But when looking at Enrique Freeman's game, I think he has a lot of polish for someone who's still very long and could put on weight, and I think he's somebody that could block shots, have like touch shots in the post, and could be a pick and roll guy. And so I like Freeman's game, and I think he's a solid player, and I love that he got the recognition and was able to get drafted. That being said, it's really hard for me to get past a Tristan Newton pick, and I feel somewhat neutral about Johnny Furphy. Because of this, I'm going to put Indiana at the top of C tier for now. Now, let's move on to Milwaukee. And to be honest, I did not love the Bucks draft. And in particular, I think they really reached on getting AJ Johnson. I understand that AJ Johnson has a great ceiling and he could use his elite athleticism, speed, and handle in order to become a premier guard in the NBA. but I just don't think that he fits the Bucks timeline. AJ Johnson is at least 2 or 3 years away from being able to get any meaningful minutes, and Milwaukee needs to add depth quickly. They can't keep selecting guys similarly to Marjon Beauchamp, who I actually think probably could develop into be a good player one day, but doesn't fit the current timeline. Milwaukee is in win now mode, and they need to get the most out of what they can with their current roster, and I don't think AJ Johnson makes them any more likely to be a title contender next year. That being said, I love them snagging Tyler Smith in the second. I think Tyler Smith can be a really nice pick and pop 5, although in my opinion he's much more of a natural 4. But I think he provides a lot of depth, and I think he could be a really nice piece for them. Having that shooting option really is great, and I think it makes them a solid team. That being said, it's really hard for me to get past the AJ Johnson pick, and because of that, I'm going to have to put them in C tier. Now, let's move on and talk about Toronto, who I think took a really interesting draft strategy. They were selecting 4 guys in this draft class, and the first of which is Jacoby Walter. I'm not the biggest Jacoby Walter fan because I really question his athleticism, and I think that he really could be a cone on defense. I think that he really does have the potential to maybe use his length, have his vertical leap be a nice tool for him, but he doesn't look like a good defender. And to me, I compared him and will continue to compare him to players such as Duncan Robinson. That being said, I think they took a really interesting selections when they got Jonathan Mogbo and Ulrich Komke. These are 2 guys that are going to be projects and are going to take time, but have the potential to be really good starters in the NBA, and they snagged them in the second round. Not to mention, they were able to grab Jamal Shed, who I think can be a backup point guard day 1. I really like the last 3 picks that Toronto made, and I think that Ulrich Komke in the late 50s, I believe he was picked 57, may go down as one of the steals in the drafts. I also like the fact that they picked players who are going to fit their timeline rather than making the mistake that I believe Milwaukee did in picking guys that need more time when Milwaukee needs to win now. I think that this may be a little high, but I am going to put Toronto in the S tier of this draft. Now let's move on to the Mavericks. And the Mavericks only selected 1 player in Melvin Agensa. They didn't really do much in this draft, and Agensa I think is a solid 3-and-D guy, and I like his 6'7" frame in Dallas. I think that Dallas, when you're a championship team, you can never have too many shooting wings, and Dallas followed that approach when they selected Agensa. They didn't do much else, so it's really hard to put them above C tier, but I'll put them ahead of Milwaukee, but leave them behind Atlanta. Now let's look at the Memphis Grizzlies, who I think really went out and got their guy in Zach Edey. If Zach Edey works out, his ability to play alongside Memphis makes him really tough to guard. Firstly, if Zach Edey pans out as a starter, you're now able to move Jaren Jackson to the 4, and think about the length that you'll have protecting the rim down low. That's truly exciting. I also think that Zach Edey, if he sets hard screens, is going to make it really difficult for teams to navigate it. Because you're not going to go under on a player like Ja Morant because A, Edey can twist it and then Ja can get downhill. Ja also has a good shot and can knock it down, so teams are more likely than not going to try to bully over. But how are you going to bully a ball screen when it's a massive frame in Zach Edey? And I actually really like his fit for them, even though in my eyes he was probably overdrafted by a couple picks. The next selections that the Grizzlies were able to make, I don't love. They selected Jalen Wells at 39, and for me, Jalen Wells is the type of guy that I like his length in shooting, but that's about it, and I think the Grizzlies probably could make some better picks. But the pick that I really don't like is picking Cam Spencer. I understand that Cam Spencer played well at UConn, and a lot of people like his basketball IQ and the number of actions that he ran. But for me, similar to Tristan Newton, he was a product of the system, and I don't think he'll be in the NBA for long. Because of that, I'm going to move the Grizzlies to the bottom of A tier. The Timberwolves took a really interesting approach to developing their team this year in the draft. A lot of the times when a team just made it to a conference finals or an NBA finals and had a really deep run, when teams make the selections in the draft in the coming months, they're looking to pick complementary role players that are really going to make other guys better. Minnesota went a different direction and took two ball-dominant scorers in Rob Dillingham and Terrence Shannon. I'll start off with the Rob Dillingham pick, which I think they probably took a little too high and they traded a lot for. However, if Rob Dillingham pans out, pairing him next to Ant could be a match made in heaven. I love seeing the flashes that Rob Dillingham has, and if Minnesota believes that he's worth the multiple picks that they traded up to get him, clearly there's other things that buy and support his stock. The pick that I really love, however, is Terrence Shannon. I think that Terrence Shannon has been undervalued due to his off-the-court incident, which it has came out was not his fault. I really like Terrence Shannon's game, and I think that as a scorer, he could be a really solid piece and could really elevate Minnesota's second unit. A lot of Minnesota's second unit right now relies on Naz Reid to carry the offense alongside a bunch of defensive guys, but giving him a high-level guard that can run the second unit is going to make Minnesota's already deadly bench that much scarier to face. As far as where I would rank their draft, while I do think they overtraded for Dillingham, I'm still going to put them at the top of B tier because I really like the Shannon selection. Now let's move on to the Spurs, who I think had a solid draft. Let's look at their first pick, where they got Stephon Castle. Stephon Castle is a classic Spurs guy, someone that is going to defend, play hard, and do the little things. I think that they're going to buy in on Castle's ability to get to the rim at will, play off of 2 feet, and finish through contact. I don't think that anybody has really bought in on his shot. However, as I've mentioned earlier, if you defend extremely well and do other things, you don't have to be a great shooter. For me, I had the dream of Matas playing with Wembanyama, and that would have just been obscene, but clearly the NBA scouts this year did not love Matas' game. When looking at the Spurs' later picks, I really like Juan Nunez and think that he's a very solid pickup for them. I think Juan Nunez is going to take time, however the Spurs already have an international development system, have dealt with those types of guards in the past, and while Juan Nunez is slow, the Spurs are one of the few teams he can play for, because even if he gets beat, he's just funneling the guards in to Victor Wembanyama, who just protects the rim at all costs. Finally, they snagged Harrison Ingram in the later part of the second round, and I think Harrison Ingram is another textbook Spurs guy who's going to provide spot minutes off the bench and elevate their roster. For these reasons, I'm going to put the Spurs in the S tier. Actually, I'll put them in the top of A tier, because I do think S tier needs to be reserved for a few teams, but that shows how much I like the Spurs draft. Now let's move on to the Jazz, and I think the Cody Williams pick that they had was solid. I had him mocked at 9, and I think he went 10 to Utah, and I think that Cody Williams offers a lot of upside. I think that his length, potential to shoot, potential to defend, as I mentioned, potential a lot. But I love the Jazz G League team. The Salt Lake City Stars, coached by Steve Wojnarowski, has been a really great team, and they've really developed players. And I think that Cody Williams is going to be a key piece of their rebuild. Obviously, the Kyle Filipowski selection in the second round is another absolute steal, as they're getting a first round, maybe top 20 talent at 32, and that's something that honestly just fell into Utah's lap. As far as Isaiah Collier is concerned, I don't love Collier's game. I know that he had all of that hype preseason, however, post-injury, I have not loved the film that I've seen, and I think that sometimes there's a lot of aspects of his game that are pretty limited. That being said, I really like their other two picks, and for that reason, I'm going to put the Jazz in the middle of A tier. Now let's move on to the Clippers, who really only made one pick. They selected Cam Christie, who I think they're assuming is going to be another wing shooter off the bench for them, and as I've mentioned multiple times, you can't go wrong with 3-and-D wings. Because of that, I'm just going to quickly go over them, and I'm going to put them in the C tier. When you only make one pick, and it's just kind of a mid-second rounder, there's not much you can do to have a spectacular draft. Now let's look on to the Suns, who I actually right now am going to put at the top of my S tier because I loved their draft. Firstly, the Suns got exactly what they need in getting Ryan Dunn, who is the best defender in this draft class. Ryan Dunn also is going to be able to play off of the ball, and while teams will gap off him, Ryan Dunn is intelligent enough to be a free screener. I also think Ryan Dunn's positional versatility fits really well with a Suns lineup that is going to have different guys playing each night because of how many stars they have. Not only did they get Ryan Dunn, they also were able to snag a great connective piece in Oso Ighodaro. Ighodaro has a plethora of assists, and he's going to do an awesome job running delay actions to get the ball in the Suns' playmakers' hands. While these two are not really sexy picks, I love how much it's going to make Phoenix better, and these are the type of picks that I like seeing in a draft. Now let's move on to Portland, who also only ended up keeping one guy that they selected. However, they were able to get Donovan Clingan, who fell to them at 7. Most mocks had Donovan Clingan as the top 3 or top 5 pick, and I'm sure Portland was ecstatic to see him fall. While this was really the only player they're going to be keeping on their roster, it's a piece that they probably did not expect to get, and I love seeing how it's made Portland be a better team, and I think it's going to be a great start for the rebuild. Because of this, I'm going to put it in the high B tier. I can't put it much higher because there was only one pick, and I don't love the pick. I think it's a really good pick, but it's not like a jump out the room, you got a steal pick, because I'm actually lower on Clingan than most, but still a very solid selection. Now we're going to move on and look at the Kings, who also only selected one guy. However, this time it was Devin Carter. For those of you who didn't watch my video, Devin Carter is very much a grit, hustle guy who's going to make those around him better. When I look at Devin Carter's game, though, his shot looks good statistically. However, when I actually watch it, I don't love his shot, and I question how much that is going to fit in an NBA system. Devin Carter is an incredible athlete, though, so I'll know he'll be able to keep up to the Kings' fast-paced pistol offense, and I think it could make them a really solid team. I'm also going to put them in B tier. However, I'm going to put them in the bottom of B tier because I don't love this Carter pick as much as I liked the Clingan snag. Now we're going to talk about the Knicks, who had an extremely active draft. Firstly, they snagged Bakome Dadier, who I think is a project player who's going to take time. But if he does pan out, he could be a really nice selection at the end of the first round. The pick that I really love, and I love more than most picks in this draft, was Tyler Kolek in the second round. Tyler Kolek is very similar to Jalen Brunson in the fact that he always plays off of 2 feet and is looking to help pass for others. Kolek is the definition of a Tibbs guy, and I think that if anyone could make Tyler Kolek a solid defender, it is Tom Thibodeau. I love the fact that he's there, and I think he makes the Knicks much better. Speaking of Tibbs guys, let's talk about Kevin McCullough, who they also snagged. McCullough is so much a hustle guy who does the little things, and it's going to make the Knicks a really solid and tough team to beat. I think that is another great selection. Finally, they got Ariel Hukporti, who, to be honest, I've only watched like a couple scrimmages of, and so I don't have the best opinion, but to me, he's a project player that the Knicks can work on and develop in Westchester. For me, I don't see how I don't put the Knicks in A tier. Really solid draft. Now we're going to talk about the Pelicans, who also had 2 selections in this draft class. The Pelicans, their first pick was Yves Missi, who I think fills a need and does exactly what they want. He's an aggressive, rim-running center that can set screens and be a lob threat, and that's really all you need at the center position most of the time. With their second round pick, I think that I was a little perplexed when they selected Antonio Reeves, because I think they could have probably gotten Antonio Reeves as an undrafted free agent, but clearly they had some intel that said otherwise, and I don't hate the Antonio Reeves pick. He's a really solid player in college, and he can do a lot of things at an okay to high level. Because of this, I'm going to put the Pelicans in the B tier. Now we're going to talk about the Charlotte Hornets, who most people really dislike their draft because they picked Tijan Salon extremely high. I will be the first person to admit that they did pick him high, but I actually like his upside, and I think at his size, he could become a really high potential, successful player. I think that there's a lot for Salon to learn. However, if the Hornets are going to swing for the fences, I like the fact that they took their guy. The pick that I really love, though, is the fact that they got KJ Simpson in the mid-second. I think Simpson could be the steal of this draft, and I think Simpson's defense, hustle, and scoring, and even passing makes him a tough player to pass up on, and I'm shocked that he fell all the way to the 40s for the Hornets. Because of that, I'm going to put the Hornets draft in the A tier. Now we're going to talk about the Houston Rockets, who also did not make many selections in this draft, and their only selection was Reed Sheppard. They've been very high on Reed Sheppard for the entire draft prospect, and I give my kudos to the Rockets organization for not being pressured to go with another player. Because of that, and because of Reed Sheppard's elite shot profile, I think it's very easy to put the Rockets in the upper half of B tier. Now we're going to talk about the Heat, who I think honestly had an interesting draft. They picked Kelly Oubre, who to me seems like the complete opposite of a Heat guy. From everything that you're going to see with the Heat, they are going to be a team that focuses on work ethic and doing all the little things. If you read anything about Kelly Oubre, he is not a big believer in doing the little things. For me, this pick seems like the Heat were taking a swing at potential and decided to go with Oubre. On the other hand, I really like their second round selection in Pelle Larsson, and I think Pelle Larsson provides shooting, depth, and could be a really nice piece in Miami. When I evaluate the two selections that Miami made, I think that they really took a swing for the fences in Kelly Oubre, and maybe he works out, maybe he doesn't. But I think that they were also able to get a solid Heat guy that is going to be one of the dozen guys that in a few years from now you think of as, wow, Miami just finds role players when they got Pelle Larsson. Maybe Kelly Oubre is able to work out, and that makes this an even more elite pick. But if you're not buying in on his upside, and I'm not really buying in on that, I think I'm going to have to put Miami in the B tier. For Chicago, they only made one selection, but I think they lucked out in getting Matas Buzelis. Not only is he a Chicago kid, he was number 2 on my big board, and I think that teams are going to regret passing him, and I can't believe that he fell out of the top 10. I'm very tempted to put Chicago in S tier, but as I've said multiple times throughout this video, it's hard to put you there unless you've made multiple good selections. Because of this, I'm going to put the Bulls in the top of A tier, and I love the Matas find. Unfortunately for Brooklyn, despite the fact that they just acquired a lot of picks, they did not make a single trade into the draft this year, and so were unable to make a selection. I think this is a really rough start to your rebuild. However, it's been a long time coming with some of Brooklyn's lackluster trades. I'm going to have to unfortunately put the Nets in the D tier. Now let's move on to Denver. And the Nuggets also only selected one guy. However, this time they were able to get Day'Ron Holmes. I like Holmes' game, and I think that he absolutely dominated at Dayton. Holmes is a touch older, but I don't think that that's the biggest issue, as the Nuggets have constantly selected guys who were older and continued to develop them. Another random piece is the Nuggets were actually able to get PJ Hall on a 2-way contract, which is pretty funny considering the fact that Hunter Tyson, his former Clemson teammate, is also on a 2-way contract in Denver. For me, I think that Denver had a solid selection. I think that Day'Ron Holmes can be the rest that Jokic needs, and I think that Holmes has the potential to be a really solid starting big one day, although I don't know if he'll ever start with Denver. As far as where I would put it, when you only make one pick, it's hard to fully evaluate, but I'll snag it in the bottom of B tier for now. Now let's move on to the Thunder, who I think had a very up and down draft. Firstly, when they got Nikola Topic, I thought it was an absolute steal, and I still do. It's going to take Topic time, obviously, to recover from his torn ACL, but I think he could provide some pieces that the Thunder still need. On the other hand, when they selected Dylan Jones in the first round, I was shocked. In my opinion, I had Dylan Jones 70th on my big board, and I don't see the vision for why he would be a first-round pick. I think that what a lot of teams like in Dylan Jones is his potential to maybe be a facilitator with good size. However, I don't see him as a true one, so his good size goes away when he has to play up. Finally, they picked AJ Mitchell, who I think is a solid player and I think is better than Dylan Jones, and they got him in the mid-second. I'm going to put the Thunder in the top of B tier because I truly can't justify the Dylan Jones pick, even though I loved Topic's selection. Now we're going to talk about the Warriors, who only got one player in Quinton Post. However, I think Quinton Post is a great addition to their team. He provides screen setting, rebounding, and shooting, which is a lot of things that you want in a big, and he's going to make the guys around him better. I really like him in Golden State. However, I'm going to keep them in B tier because they only made a few selections. Now we're going to talk about the Celtics, who I honestly didn't love their draft. They first off picked Baylor Sharman, who I think is a very much Celtics player. He provides shooting, length, and size, and does a lot of the little things, which is great to see. However, I don't love their Anton Watson pick, and I truly believe they could have gotten him as an undrafted two-way guy. That pick really hinders my opinion of their draft class, and Baylor Sharman wasn't enough of a player to wow me to have me select Baylor Sharman and move them up into the B tier. I'm going to have the Celtics at this part of the C tier, and honestly, I did not love their draft. Now let's talk about the Lakers, and obviously the Lakers did a lot this draft. Firstly, they were able to have Dalton Connect fall to them, which is a massive steal. They got a great piece of talent with the 17th pick, and he made their team better immediately. Obviously, the elephant in the room for the Lakers is Bronny James, who, as most scouts would say, probably is not talented enough to make the league on his own. However, if the Lakers wasting a 55th pick and a fringe roster spot is enough to ensure that LeBron stays, I'm not going to hold that against them. What I really liked from the Lakers was the fact that they got two really solid two-way guys in Blake Hinson and Amel Traore. These are two guys who I think one of them could pan out and be a really solid player. I just don't know who yet. I think that their two-way and underdrafted free agent signings have been so good that it has convinced me to move them to A tier, despite the fact that they very blatantly wasted a pick for Bronny. Finally, let's talk about the Magic, whose only selection was Tristan da Silva. And to be honest, Tristan da Silva, as I said in my video thumbnail about him, is a jack of all trades. He can do a lot of little things and will be a nice piece who can come off the bench and start in Orlando. I don't think that he's going to wow you in any particular way, but I think he's okay and a solid player, and I'm going to put them in the top of C tier. Overall, I want to thank you for watching another video of the Rim Review. We'll get back to more film-based stuff coming soon. However, I think it was a really fun time analyzing the draft and looking at the selections that were made.